Welcome CSC 230 class to part 2 of ex4-CSS. We're doing the CSS on our first ex4 exercise, lists and links. And what we did so far on our previous, we got to this point and we put some background color. We centered our element, and the way we did that was with CSS. And we're doing internal CSS styles. We didn't do a lot yet. And a lot of it was just done to the body element. We put a margin auto, which puts an auto kind of sizing on either side, and it actually gives it the impression of being centered, and it requires width to be with that, so we use the width of our image. We give it a background color. It's our beigey kind of color there. If I hover over it, I can see it. And we also used a font family, and by using font family for body, that's kind of the default for the page pretty much. And then anything else we want different, we can specify them in particular declaration blocks when we want them. We also created a main section. We did this in the HTML. We didn't have to do a lot with the HTML, but we created a header, a main, and a footer. And that's all we're going to have in this one, until we go further. And that was to kind of break up our page in sections. The header section is the one that just has the image. It has that banner image there. Main is everything else, and then footer is just the copyright at the bottom. So we can target CSS by using them. We already put padding around. That way we didn't have to put padding around the page, or we didn't have to put padding around every single element. We just put padding around the main kind of area. It's kind of a div or division of the page is what main is, but it is an HTML element. And what we're going to do next, and we're kind of going bigger to smaller. So we started with body, and then we kind of work down to main, and then we can kind of dig into some of the smaller elements. We'll leave the footer one at the bottom, since that's kind of at the bottom of the page. Another one that I'll kind of do next, I'll go into the H1. I'll create one for the H1. And what would we do with the H1? Well, it has a lot of space above it that we actually want to kind of get rid of, so we might do that. We might take away some space above. And remember, I mentioned there's a lot of default spacing going on here that we're not really familiar with, so we want to adjust it a little bit. And you could experiment a little bit, and you might just do like margin top and put it to 0 and see what happens. I'll do 0 pixels. And I'll just save it and then see what happens. See if it gives us some space up at the top when I refresh this. And it does. It takes away some of that space. Now we have a 30 pixel margin around here. It still looks like it's a little bit bigger at the top. You can put a little bit more. You might say, well, how would I put more? You can actually put, instead of 0, actually you can't do this with padding, but you can do it with margin. You can actually put negative. So what if I put like negative 10 pixels and I saved it? And I'll refresh it. And there, it took a little bit of space away. So now it looks a little more even. So you can use negative margin amounts, and that's what I did for the H1. Now, as long as I'm talking about the H1, I think I want to make it like a nice serif font, nice bold serif font. And I don't have to specify bold because it's an H1 is always bold. They'll always use kind of a bold style of it. And I want to sample a color from here. Now, I'm not going to use eyedropper and all that right now. I don't have the ability to really do that in brackets, so I'm just going to guess a little bit. And then we'll just try it out and we'll adjust it a little bit. But I'm going to put a color in there for the font. I'm going to actually put a font family. Now, if you don't want to like retype all this, you can copy this, except the fonts are going to be different here. So I'll just paste this in here. Now, I don't want Tahoma. I'm going to try something called Georgia. Georgia is a nice serif font, but it has a very nice, big, heavy bold. And I'll use Cambria as a second choice. That's like an office font. That's kind of used in place of Times New Roman, and I'll throw Times New Roman in here. And one thing you have to remember with Times New Roman is you have to put quotes around it, because there's three words there. So and notice it's putting double quotes here. So I do want quotes around Times New Roman, and then in the end, the last one here, the default is just going to be serif. So there's sans dash serif and there's serif. So this is a serif font. So whatever the default serif font that browser might use. So you're using first choice, second choice. Now if I save this, it should put it in a Georgia bold when I refresh this. It has a nice bold to it. It's Georgia bold right there. If you weren't sure, remember you can right click and do inspect. And if you kind of went down to this bottom area, it's showing Georgia. So it's using Georgia there. That's good. I'll X out of this. And I do want it to use kind of like a grayish, purplish color, kind of a cool purple from up here. So I'll go back and I'll give it a color. And remember, for font color, you don't do font color. You actually just do color. And I'll choose any color right now. I'll choose aquamarine and put a semicolon, and then you can right click on it and do a quick edit, and I'm just going to slide this up into the purples, and I'm just going to look for something grayish purple, not too purple. You know, I don't want anything really, just something like that, and then maybe down a little bit, just something like I got it from the clouds. And I'll just try one just to start. I'll save it, and I'll just see what it looks like, and I'll refresh. And I can see it's a little light. I want it a little bit darker, and maybe a little less, maybe a little bluer too, from just what I'm looking at right now. So I'll right click on here and do a quick edit, and maybe a little more bluer, so I can move this into the blue a little bit. And I'll make it a little darker too. Kind of something like that. Maybe, you know, you could try it a couple times, but something like that is about what I want. So I'll X out of that, I'll save it, and then I'll take a look and see what it looks like. And that looks a little better. That matches that pretty well. And again, the best thing to do, you could open this image in Photoshop, or you could go on Pixlr and take an eyedropper and sample some areas if you really wanted to. We're just doing it by eye right now, and that looks pretty good. And we'll use this color for this bottom area in the footer. And you know, we'll do that in a little bit. So actually, I might do that next. As long as we're using this color, maybe let's try the footer. Even though we're going to put the footer at the bottom, let's do footer next. We'll just target footer. And I have my two curly braces here, and what I'm going to do, I'll highlight this and copy it. You might say, why are you copying that? And I'll copy it twice. You might think, what are you doing here? I'm actually going to make this background color and put a dash here because I want that background color to be that purple, and then for this I just want this to be white. So I'll do an FFF for that. I'll save it, and I'll refresh it, and there it is. Now you can see I need some padding in here because it's kind of cramped in here, and I want a little more room. So I want some padding on the top and bottom and left and right. Now I don't want as much all around even. I want 30 actually, so it lines up here with the 30 pixels that we have already. So I want 30 on the left, 30 on the right, and maybe like, I don't know, maybe like 10 on the top and 10 on the bottom. So remember how to do that. That's padding, because that'll put space within our element. I'll put padding, and remember how that works. It goes that, you know, top, right, bottom, left. It goes in that like diamond shape, top, right, bottom, left, or it goes kind of like north, east, south, west, however you want to do it. And it goes treble is the order that it goes in. Maybe you just want to remember that. So treble would be top. So top will go 10 pixels, and then and there's no commas in here, and then I'll go 30, which would be the right, and then I'll do 10 again, which would be the bottom, and then I'll do 30 again in the right. And there's shortcuts that we can do, but just for now, that way we know top, right, bottom, left. And I'll save it, and I'll just see what it looks like. And it looks like a little too much, actually. Seems like a lot. Seems like there's a lot on the top and bottom, and there's probably a reason, because we probably have extra margin, because of paragraphs have extra margin in them. And what I'll do here, let's just see what happens. I'm just going to put a P. I'm going to put a P in here. And you might be saying, why are you doing this? Well, I'm doing this because there's a lot of defaults that we're not aware of right now, and it's putting a default space above and below. So I'm just going to put margin, and I'm going to put 0. And I don't even have to put pix, but I'll see if that helps right now. So take away all the margin on the paragraphs, and I'll refresh this, and that helped. It took away that top. There's a default margin on the top and bottom that we took away right here. So I took that away right here, and it looks a little better. And maybe if I just want to make it bold, the last thing I'll do with footer is just make the font bold. And the way you do that is font. It's not font style, it's actually font weight. Style would be italic, but weight can actually make it bold. And they have a bunch of numbers here, but you could scroll down and find bold and just use that. So I'm just going to make that bold at the bottom, and I'll refresh it, and then it gets a little overpowering. So I'm even going to make it a little smaller. Now, I'm not sure what font size I want to do, but if you just want to make it a little smaller, just use a percentage. Just use font size and look for font size, and maybe just do 90%. And then it'll just be 90% of whatever the regular size is. So I'll do that, and I'll refresh it, and there it is. There's my 90%. It's a little bit smaller. You could always go smaller, but that's fine for now. So it has a nice kind of little footer section on it here. And this might be a good place to stop right here before we start working on the list a little bit so the video doesn't get too long. So let's take a break here and we'll end part 2 here, and then we'll pick up part 3 with kind of tweaking some of the lists and doing our kind of final layout work on this. But, we just did some of this. We just did the H1, we adjusted the main, the footer. Now we're going to adjust some of this down here. And one of the things we're going to attack a little bit, we already did the paragraphs here in the footer, and I'm going to do these things in between the footer. I'm going to put one for the OL, and I'll put comma UL. The reason that I put the comma there, then whatever I do, this will affect both of them. Since I have an ordered list and an unordered list, this will target both of them. Whatever I do for one will do for the other, and then I'll also make one for the LI, for the line items. And remember, we just kind of messed around with that a little on the previous exercise. I don't think we have a lot to do, but we might want to put some space after, or put some margin bottom to spread them out a little bit, margin or padding. And one thing I just want to point out, when you use margin, and you could use margin or padding with text in terms of spacing, either one will work. And sometimes margin is nice because you could use negative. Like I said with the H1, we used a negative margin, so you'll get a feel of which one to use. So what we want to do with our list, if I go back and look at it, one thing I just want to change here is there's this space in here. Now I already took the margin off, and there's still space here, because if there was space because of this paragraph, it would have took it out. It's actually putting space above the ordered list. So what I want to do is actually go in the ordered list, and you might not know this, but I'm just kind of pointing it out. I'm just going to put margin top, and if I put 0 right now, and I'll put pics just in case, and if I put margin top 0, it should wipe that out, and I'll refresh it, and you can see what happened. It wiped it out. Now it doesn't look that it's a little too crowded. I like that it goes with it a little bit, but it's a little too crowded, so I could put a little more space there, maybe just like 10 or something. I don't need a lot. And I'll refresh it, and that looks a little nicer, maybe even a little less. Maybe even I'll do, you know, you can kind of mess around a little. Maybe I'll do like 6. And that looks a little better. Now, one thing I could also do, this is with HTML, and I don't always recommend this, but you could go right into the HTML for these paragraphs, and you could put a B tag in here. It's an opening B and a closing B, and that's just bold. And I could do it down here. And I could do it down here. So people still use that. It's not that bad to use. You know, we could have created a style, but then we would have had to create a style just for that one. So that'll work. We put bold in there and refresh it. That works fine. It's making those bold. So our spacing is good in here. The only other thing I want to do is kind of spread out these line items, which we already know how to do from our previous exercise. That would be right in here. And we could just do, you could do margin or padding, either one. And you might just want to be consistent. If you're using margin a lot with some of these paragraph things, then stick with margin. And I'll do margin bottom. It's almost like space after that you would use with Word. So, and make sure you spell it right. It's showing up red because it's not spelled right. It won't do that in W3 School, so that's why this is nice working in brackets. Margin bottom, and I'm just going to do like, you know, not a whole lot, maybe like 4 pixels, and see how that looks to start. And that's between each line. That's after each line. When I hit refresh here, you can see it spread them out just a little. Maybe I'll do it just a little more, maybe like 6. Just so it's a little more noticeable since we're doing it. And I'll refresh it. So now it has 6 pixels space after each line item. And that looks pretty good. The only problem we have is we have a little extra space down here at the end of this, and we just have to figure out where that is. Now there's ways we could kind of figure that out. You know, one way is to actually go down here and do inspect. And they have some of these tools in here. I could see there's some, if I go on this arrow and I kind of hover, click on this arrow again, and I hover over some of these areas, I can see where there's some space coming. See, there's my padding, but there's actually extra space kind of after here, and it looks like it's after the list. So let me just see if I put some, if I take away the space after this last list here. Now I have them for both right now, but I'd have to make a separate one. I'll put one here just for the UL, and we'll see if this kind of helps it a little bit. I'll put UL, and I'll put margin bottom, and I'll put 0. And I'll see if that fixes it. I don't know, but I'll see. And that's just for the UL. That's the bulleted one, so that's unordered. That's the second one, the bulleted one. And I'll save that, and I'll see if that fixes anything at the bottom. I'll close this thing up, and I'll refresh. And there, brought it down a little bit. So I could try that negative thing. I could do, you know, negative 10 here. Save it, and that might bring it a little bit closer, and that looks pretty good. I think that looks kind of what I was doing here. I forget what I did here. I might have actually, I think on my original one, I think I took away the padding at the bottom of main so that it didn't have that area. So we have that little extra area. That's okay. So I don't know what's worse, tweaking the I don't know what's worse, tweaking the main or tweaking the that last little unordered list. Now that I think about it, instead of making a special thing just for this, I'd probably get rid of this, even though that worked fine. I'm going to get rid of that, but just to be consistent, so I'm not doing so many tweaking things, I might go to main, and remember, we have 30 all around, so I'm going to do, actually I could copy this, whatever you can do to make it faster. I'm just going to do a space, paste, paste, so it's 30 all around. That's the same thing as just 30. So I just want the one on the bottom. So remember, top, right, bottom. And maybe at the bottom, I just want to put like 10 and see how that looks. I think that's what I did on the other one. And I'll refresh that. And I think that does about the same thing. Looks about the same from doing that. And you know, even if I put 0 at the bottom, let's see how that looks. Gets it a little tighter. That doesn't look bad either. Although it looks like there's a little more on the top and a little less on the bottom. So I might kind of just find a little difference there. I might, instead of 5, maybe I'll just put 6, because I like to stick with numbers I'm using in other places. And I'll refresh that, and that looks pretty good. So by looking at this, that's pretty much what we had. I didn't do it exactly the same way. My color is a little darker here, but that's okay. But just to review, because I think we're done with this, so I'm pretty much done with my, and remember, we did all our CSS right in the index page. So we did a body style where we did the margin, width, background color, font family, and that's, remember, everything you do for body is pretty much for the whole page. For the main section, we just adjusted the padding. We had 30 padding all around, but then at the end, I ended up making the bottom one 6 because there was a little too much space. The H1, I took off the margin and took off that extra space up at the top, and even put a negative margin, changed the font, changed the color, got this purple kind of color here. The paragraphs, I took the margins off so there weren't as many spacing on that, and I noticed that the one that was in the footer did that. My OLUL, we just took a margin top of 6 pixels. That kind of reduced the space above there, so that reduced the space above, so we had not as much space above the list. Each of these lists had space above, and we kind of took that off. Now remember, it's not called space above, it's called margin top, and we just reduced it to like 6 pixels, which gives it a nice, it brings that heading kind of closer to the list, but not too close. So that's kind of what we did there. And then moving down with our styles, we did our LIs just have a margin bottom of 6 pixels. That just added a little kind of breathing room in here, almost like line spacing. It's almost using like line height might have worked with that as well. But we used a little, you know, padding after, or margin bottom on each single line item or list item. And then for our footer, we had a background color, the same one that we used for our heading. We had a white color. We put padding all around, 30 on the left and right, 10 on the top and bottom. We made it bold. We did a font size of 90% to make it a little smaller, and that's about it. Remember, we also made 3 sections, main, footer, and header at the top that we really didn't do anything with, but we just put it in its own section so that we can put some padding on main, and that's what we did. So this is our, you know, this is all our styling right here. Just this little bit of code took it from the way it was to start, and this is kind of the finished product that we're working with. So this is what you're going to get to. It should look something like this, except the colors might be a little different. You might, if you had a different picture, you might use different colors here, but that's pretty much what we're working on for ex4-CSS. The next part that we're going to end up doing is putting a picture here with a little caption underneath, but this will be the one that you turn in and that you upload for now. So I'll put more instructions for that of how to upload it. So you're going to upload this. Remember, when you go into CyberDuck, you're just going to re-upload your index page. You don't even have to re-upload anything else. You can just re-upload your page and just drag your index into your ex4. Make sure it's the right one.